A film that doesn't exist. No records in the studio archives. No mentions in filmographies. No posters, no reviews. But it was real, and Harrison Ford had been in it. That was a fact no one could deny. His young face, lean, sharp-eyed, already carrying that unmistakable stubbornness, appeared in frames found inside an old box, tossed into a yard sale along with forgotten junk. Black and white images. Damaged film stock. But it was him. How had this film disappeared? And why had he never spoken about it? No one understood. Only the film itself could tell the truth. But the film was gone. All that remained were fragments. Unsettling scenes, as if deliberately ripped from history. Disjointed dialogue. Faces of actors who were never seen in movies again. And at the center of it all, a young Harrison Ford, looking as though he knew this role would be dangerous. Why had he stayed silent? Why had he allowed it to be erased? His silence felt suspicious. And now, his past refused to stay buried. A rundown theater on the outskirts of Los Angeles still smelled of dust and old film reels. Once, it had been a refuge for movies no one wanted in wide release. Independent films, experimental projects, stories that exposed uncomfortable truths. And somewhere in these dark rows of empty seats, the ghost of this story remained. The story Harrison Ford had tried to forget. Many years ago, before the fame, before the iconic roles, he was just another struggling actor bouncing from one audition to the next. No money. No steady work. Each rejection forced him to ask himself, was it even worth it? Then one day, he got an offer. A small independent studio, barely any budget. A film no one had heard of, from a director whose name meant nothing. But something about the script made Ford say yes. This wasn't just a movie. It was a film about things people weren't allowed to talk about. A story about people who were erased from life. About voices the world tried to silence. Back then, he hadn't realized how dangerous that was. Filming took place at night. Abandoned warehouses. Cheap sets, where dust clogged your lungs. The crew worked for almost nothing. This wasn't a film for money. It was a film for an idea. The camera captured everything. Ford played a man who knew the truth but couldn't say it. This role was his first real lesson. He wasn't just learning to say lines, he was learning to live them. And even after the camera stopped rolling, he couldn't shake the feeling that this story was real. Something was wrong. Something about this film went beyond cinema. But Ford didn't ask questions. He did his job. And when the movie wrapped, he moved on, not knowing that this role had made him part of a secret that was never supposed to surface. The film was released, but no one saw it. No posters. No premiere. Not even bad reviews. Just gone. At the time, Harrison didn't think much of it. It was just one of dozens of low-budget projects that young actors took for pennies, hoping someone might notice them. Then, the disappearances started. Not just the film. The director vanished. Moved overseas. No contact. The producer disappeared without a trace. Some of the actors never worked again. Then, one day, someone approached him. No threats. No demands. Just a simple warning. If you want a career, a man in an expensive suit told him, you never saw this film. Ford didn't ask who they were. He understood. The film had touched something untouchable. It had been erased before it could make people ask the wrong questions. And Harrison? He stayed silent. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew he had a choice. To stay in this fight. Or to walk away, build a career, and one day change the world in a different way. He chose the latter. It was the worst thing he ever did, but he did it for the right reasons. For years, Harrison Ford had supported independent cinema. He had funded filmmakers who weren't afraid to tell the truth. But he had never spoken about that film. Until the day an African American became president of the United States. That was when the last surviving copy of the film was pulled from storage. This story didn't begin on a film set. It began at a kitchen table in a small house in Washington. There, in the dim light, a man with tired eyes was writing. His name was Samuel Gray. He worked in a senator's home, not in an office, not in government chambers, but downstairs, among the kitchenware and the scent of old wooden shelves. He had seen and heard things that others only suspected. His hands polished silver for guests who casually discussed how to cover up murders. His ears caught words that were never meant to be heard. He knew why hospitals in black neighborhoods closed faster than they opened. Why schools crumbled, while their children were forced to work instead of study. Why police always arrived too late, if they came at all. He knew the names. The politicians who ordered killings. The victims who were marked as missing in official reports. He couldn't go to journalists. His words wouldn't matter. But he could write a story. And so he did. The script that landed in young Harrison Ford's hands wasn't just a film. It was a document. Disguised as a crime thriller, it revealed real atrocities happening under the nose of a country that prided itself on democracy. The film showed the everyday brutality of white families toward black citizens. Scenes of humiliation and discrimination that had been considered normal for an entire generation. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the film mirrored real events. The names had been changed, but anyone who knew where to look could recognize them. The film didn't just tell the truth. It accused. It challenged people who could erase it from existence. And that's exactly what they did. The director fled overseas. The producer vanished. The actors never worked again. The film's copies were seized before the final edit. And Harrison Ford was given a choice. They didn't threaten him. They didn't force his silence. They simply gave him the chance to make the right choice. If you want a career, you never saw this film. So he made his choice. Now, 50 years later, he sat before a screen, watching what he had once helped erase. He saw a story that was never meant to disappear. He saw names that should never have been silenced. He had nowhere left to run. The film ended. The screen went dark. But this time, he wouldn't let the darkness consume this story again. He stood, walked to the projector, took the film reel in his hands, and held it against his chest. Because it was time to give the truth a second chance. Not to punish the guilty, not to rewrite history, but to force the world to ask itself one question. Who were we? And who have we become?